Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? Okay, thank you. I'm Emily Heilbronn, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this next installment in our series celebrating TBI's 90th year. I want to thank Rabbi Ruhi, who is moderating, and the panelists, Enid Lefton, Joan Bayless, Julie Raskin, Rabbi Yitz, and Jacob Griffin. And I also want to thank Gary Tepfer and Ellen Todris, who are here, who are co-members of the committee that has put this all together. And finally, I want to remind you of two upcoming events in this series. On March 10th at 3 o'clock, right here in the sanctuary and on YouTube, we will have a program on celebrating lifelong learning. And on Sunday, April 14th at 3 o'clock, we'll have a program on a caring community, which is about the ways in which TBI embodies Tikkun Olam. So thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn it over to Rabbi Ruhi.
Thank you all. It's really wonderful to be here with you today. And I don't often have cause to think about the meaning of, for myself, of what it is to be TBI's first female senior rabbi. And but I think it's always really important to take these retrospective moments and think about where we've come from and where we're going. There is a timeline in the program that was handed out to you that was put together by the people on this panel in consultation with a few others, particularly with thanks as it's written to Libby Botero and Esther Jacobson Tepfer. One of the reasons that I wanted to do these TBI at 90 programs is that I'm aware that there's a lot of institutional memory that we haven't captured and we haven't organized and kept, and especially as we all age, and we are all aging at the same rate, but for some people that may be more dire than others. As we all age, it's really important to me that we capture those memories before it's gone. So before they and the people who are holding them are gone. So that is one large reason, not just for the accessibility of those who can't be here in person today, that we're streaming this on YouTube, but also so that we can have the record of this conversation. And so I just want to name before we start that it's also important to me that if you in the audience have a contribution to our timeline, to this conversation, to our understanding of Temple Beth Israel's evolution around how we deal as a community with diversity of gender, sexual orientation, gender expression, leadership by people who are not just cisgendered men, that you share the memories and stories you have as well. So we will start by hearing from the panelists, and I know they're sitting in a particular order and their bios are listed in a different order in the program, and I'm going to ask them to speak in an even different order. So beginning with Rabbi Yitz, we're going to go chronologically-ish from when our different speakers started to have relationships with Temple Beth Israel. So beginning with Rabbi Yitz, I'm going to ask our speakers to discuss first your memories generally of egalitarianism and inclusion or lack thereof when it comes to issues of gender, sexual orientation, gender expression here at Temple Beth Israel, and any key changes that happened on your watch, either that you advocated for, that were advocated to you, that are worth noting.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. It's good to see you.
No, it's on.
I think it's on, right? Yeah, good. So it's interesting to have a timeline here events. Okay, is that better? All right, I hope it's worthwhile. I'll do my best. If not, signal to me and I'll move the mic. Okay. When I first arrived, I came to Eugene in 1971, connected with TBI around 73. And at that time, I'd say there was a hidden reality of the women's activities in the congregation. There were, women were not included in the minyan. Women did not, as far as I know, participate in any of the davening, the leadership. There were not women on the board, as far as I know, although I do remember at some of those early board meetings, I'm sorry, really, Ellen Maddox was a board member and she played a very important role on the board. She was the tuning fork for ethics. She was really tremendous, always, at helping discern what was right and what was wrong. So Ellen goes way back on the board. There had never been a woman president of the congregation or a rabbi at that point. And it was in 1983 that Leah Stern-Zweig became the first president, woman president of the community. And since then, we've had a series of great leaders: Susan Schmier, Michelle Saul, Mindy Schiffberg, Sharon Rudnick, Mara Epstein, and Diane Baxter to this day, and more to come.
Mindy Schlossberg as well.
Oh, didn't I say that?
You said Schiffberg.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mindy Schlossberg. Thank you for catching. There had been bat mitzvahs celebrated at TBI. The first one was Merle Solonsky in 1964, the year I graduated from high school. And it's funny to think that that's when the first bat mitzvah happened at TBI. That seems like quite a while ago. Let's see, what else? The Bima. The Bima is an interesting, kind of the core of a congregation. And when Reb Aryeh Hirschfield, Olav Sholem, and I had been asked by the community to fill in for a year after Rabbi Louis Nyman passed on, we tried to break the barrier of women from the Bima and asked Jill Katz to call pages from the Bima on Friday night services, and that's as far as we could go at that time. As a matter of fact, around that time, during a high holiday service, I suggested to one of the really esteemed elders of the community who was standing next to me where the Torah was laid on the Torah table, that we call up some women to the Torah. He did not.
As close to your mouth as you can.
This is about it. I can't. John, is it possible to get the mic louder? Because I'm holding this as close as it comes. Okay, that's better. All right, I'm sorry. I'll start all over again. Okay, all right. I won't start all over again. But when I suggested that we call a woman or women to the Torah, I was told in no soft words that it would be, I hate to say this, but it would be over his dead body that would happen. Well, years later, apparently, he came around and was enthusiastic about women's participation. But at that time, it was way beyond the view of the conservative leadership of the congregation. And very dedicated leadership, I have to say, but just not ready. From the Bima, a very significant person in our development is sitting two over there, Joan Bayless, who really became a wonderful prayer leader in our community and brought the voice of woman to the core of our prayer services. And it was a tremendous advancement for our community. And Joan's work and contribution really, I believe, was a significant element that paved the way forward for our community. In the year 1999, Rabbi Shoshana Spergel joined us. Rabbi Ruchi became the senior rabbi in 2015, and I have 1 minute to do this. Oh boy. Okay, all right, yeah, but all right, I'll discipline myself. I do want to make note of and praise of the partners, the spouses of the rabbis, Beatrice Simmons, Florence Nyman, Elise Kinberg, Shauna Husbands-Hankin, who were definitely our leaders in the community, have contributed greatly. And I'm going to jump now to LGBTQ because I have to. The senior rabbi told me I have to. Okay, timeline. The first wedding of same-sex couple in our congregation was with Enid and Sally. Enid Sheklow and Sally. Enid, yes, Enid Lefton, I'm hurrying, and Sally Sheklow. And that was a great process. It took a year in preparation, meetings in which we started out kind of with a dance of knowing we were heading the same direction but didn't know what to call it. I brought in material from a Rabbi Leila Gall-Berner, who had developed what was called a Brit Ahava, a covenant of love, and that wasn't good enough. Sally and Enid were really clear they wanted to get married, not Brited. So after a year of wonderful conversations, we had a wedding in the sanctuary of our old building, and the community was so elevated through that ceremony. And I need to stop, but I can still close my eyes and feel the elevation of that day. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and there was smiles that were bigger than the faces. It was really a tremendous breakthrough for us and lifted up our community. So I will pass this. I'll pass this mic.
I don't know if it's quite long enough.
I don't think this will.
Take this to Joan from this side.
Okay.
Joan Bayless. Thank you, Rabbi Yitz. Sorry for stressing you out. Can somebody else be the timekeeper here? It's a better angle if one of you flashes 1 minute left at the speakers than it is for me to do it anyway. No, okay. Hi, good afternoon. I'm so glad that you're all here. I wanted to start with going back to 1951 for 1 minute and just let you know that when we're all done, ask me about that process in the first Reconstructionist synagogue, whereby the first girls and women began to participate fully. But there's a story, and it's a personal family story, and it's from another congregation, so later. But ask me, because it's a great tale.
Okay, here we are at TBI, which started out, as you heard, as a conservative synagogue with all of the restrictions prior to the 70s that the conservative movement still imposed. And we had the great honor of being served by Rabbi Myron Kinberg, who, along with his extraordinary, brilliant wife, Elise, broke open all the old forms and allowed the light to come in. It was quite remarkable. He also was one of these people who could take any person and find what their strengths were and find a way to apply that to the community and strengthen the community and welcome the person at the same time in a very real way. And he was doing a lot of that with women too, because they were also joining, and actually frequently, this room is maybe not a fair representation because of today's topic, but there are usually a lot of women in a religious congregation, and boy, were there. And the feminist movement had shaped most of our minds, those of my generation, who came of age in the 60s and 70s, and the world was changing, and we were thrilled about that and began to take more and more place, move over to give me room. And so I met Rabbi Kinberg for the first time, and he sat me down and he said, pretty much, what can you do? And because I had had the incredible good fortune to grow up in the first Reconstructionist synagogue, I could do a lot of the service. I could read from the Torah, I could do a Haftarah, and he was he glommed onto me, and he made sure that I came to his house for lunch after services, so I'd be at services, and things like that. So it was really cool, and I got to really participate and reawaken a bunch of skills I'd learned as a child. They were small steps at first, and it was interesting. The gentleman that Rabbi Yitz referred to, who said, "Over my dead body," said to me one Shabbat when almost nobody who knew how to do this stuff had shown up. And possibly the rabbi was ill that day, I don't know, but I ended up doing a lot of the service, and when we were leaving the building at the end of the oneg, he said to me, "We really need you." So he had grown up too, and along with him, all the rest of the congregation, and it was great. Also, as people from that later generation, some of whom had been trained for bat mitzvah, began to join, we had more and more of a cohort. And then there was Rabbi Yitz teaching people, which was fantastic, opening the door. Anybody wanted to learn, he would teach you. And so it became something that was an option for anyone who could take the time to learn how to decode the musical symbols and whatever, or just do a song or do a prayer. People were encouraged to participate. Women were encouraged to participate, and it was really marvelous. When we got the Kol HaNeshama prayer book, our current prayer book, it also opened us up in our minds, because for years, Rabbi Kinberg, of most glorious memory, was so marvelous. We'd read through this conservative prayer book, "Blessed are you, O Lord, O Eternal One," we would say, as we read the word Lord, "our God, King, ruler," and so on, substituting gender-neutral words for these masculine terms. And it was a mental gymnastics we all learned how to do, and we were doing it for years before Kol HaNeshama came out, and then we had a prayer book we could actually read aloud. And I encourage you, anybody who hasn't had a look at that book, to have a read through the footnotes, because it's a master's degree in Judaism if you get all the way through it. Anyway, it was a wonderful vehicle for our increasing libertarian views. Oh, that's the wrong word to use. Thinking of that as anarchist, but it's not really. But our opening of the strictures and allowing the flow of energy within the congregation to occur without unnecessary dams and barriers. So it was a really marvelous thing. And then the lesbians started to arrive, and that was so fantastic because it woke people up. And it took a while. Some people had a little trouble adjusting. Those of us who had been second wave feminists were pretty used to lesbians and pretty comfortable, but those who were not were pretty freaked out at first, because it was, a new learning, a new social learning. It's sort of like joining a new party, which we did. And then the OCA horrible ballot measures that the community as a whole resisted, and Libby made these wonderful buttons with a Jewish star and the word mishpacha, family, in Hebrew, written on the button to say, hey, these people are part of our family. Let's all be a family. It was fantastic. Thank you, Libby. That was a beautiful thing. What was that? Oh, I didn't even know about that one. Yeah, what Libby said was at one point there was a move by a small group within the congregation to be permitted to have an absolutely full-on Orthodox service on some Shabbatot in our sanctuary. That would include a mechitza, a curtain to separate the women. We can talk about the reasons for that some other time. But anyway, the policy of our synagogue is 100% egalitarian, and that was not permissible. And then there was a separation of that crowd from our congregation. And these principles run pretty deep. I don't think you'll find us ever backsliding, although I don't know what's coming in the future. But I think that we're pretty clearly who we are. A number of years later, we did a huge, brilliantly organized, community-wide survey of attitudes and values because we were getting ready to seek a new rabbi. Rabbi Kinberg had left. Rabbi Yitzk was here, but he wasn't clear yet what direction we were going in. And what was so clear was that on this issue, the congregation was just about, I think it might have been 99%, but I think it was 100% in agreement about openness. And I'm very proud of that. And I thank our leadership for taking us in those directions and recognizing that humanity is the important issue. And I think that's pretty much what I have to say for now. Are you next? Julie's next.
Yeah, but is this long enough?
Want to change seats?
No, I think I can do this. Okay. I don't normally write out what I'm going to say, but I am, so that I'll stay to the 7 minutes. And I think it goes a little bit over, but Jacob has given me a minute. All right. Today, my older child, Eli, turns 30. And so my soul feels turned to his coming into this world and to my coming to TBI when I was 30. My process of family making involves TBI, but not as much as it should have. The thesis of what I have to say is that TBI gave me many precious moments as a queer person and also withheld them from me and my family and from other LGBTQ people in Eugene. But this really is a story of positive leadership. I came to Eugene in 1988, and Eli was born in 1994. Those 6 years were formative for me and for TBI around some of the same issues. All through my 20s, I lived in the Bay Area, came out as a lesbian, not without struggle, lost my mother without telling her I was a lesbian, lived in a lesbian compound, wrote and led lesbian seders, organized Jewish feminist programs in graduate school, lost professors and friends to AIDS, went to lesbian and gay bars and marches, and went with friends to Sha'ar Zahav, the queer synagogue in San Francisco that started in 1977. When I was 30, I came to Eugene with when my partner got a job here. I met lesbians here, many of whom were Jewish, but few were members of TBI in the late 80s. There was a very active Jewish lesbian group called Balabustas that Enid will talk about. My experience was that Balabustas was adjacent to TBI with just a little bit of overlap. But for a variety of reasons, I wanted to be in the synagogue. One reason is that my father was a rabbi of a Reform synagogue, and in that space, I was a special child, the rabbi's child. But as a queer teen and young adult in that same space, I was invisibilized in all the ways queer people are, but as the rabbi's daughter, I tried to be gracious about it. Another reason I wanted to claim a relationship with institutional Jewish space was that as the child of divorce, when I lived with my mother, I had attended Sunday school in many different synagogues. My tuition waived as professional courtesy to my father, a fact that the rabbis of those congregations felt the need to tell me. And a third reason that I wanted to be in the institutional space is that I had already attended a queer synagogue, and I knew what that felt like. By the time I got to Eugene, I wanted to participate in a synagogue where I would be fully seen, fully belong, and fully participate. At this time, as Joan told you, TBI was having its own dramatic identity issues as it moved from conservative to Reconstructionist Judaism. Struggles about gender egalitarianism, Israel-Palestine politics and gay and lesbian inclusion led to a very painful rift in the congregation, resulting in a number of congregants leaving and starting Orthodox shul across the street from TBI. Phil Zuckerman, a U of O sociology graduate student at the time, wrote a powerful book called Strife in the Synagogue, Religious Schism in a Jewish, that's right, Strife in the Sanctuary. I have that right there. A religious schism in a Jewish community, in which he uses TBI's struggles over gender issues and LGBTQ inclusion as a case study. While this struggle at TBI was kind of scary and destructive in a lot of ways to people in the Eugene Jewish community, for me, it meant that I landed here just when some straight people at TBI were making it as clear as possible that they wanted to support queer people. Among these people were Joan Bayless, Elise Kinberg, Rabbi Husband Hankins, Shauna Husband Hankins, Libby, Esther, many of the straight women who are in the, I don't want to classify you, but who were magnificent allies. The Oregon Citizens Alliance gained power in those years, and you've got that timeline in front of you, and the only change I would make to this is it says most failed to pass, which is actually not true. Most passed. Measure 9 did not pass because of the work that allies did in Eugene, allies and us, but we had the support of allies in Eugene and Portland. And then the ones that did pass were overturned as unconstitutional, but they passed. So it was a very difficult time to be in Eugene. In 1993, my partner and I decided to have a child. Because of the legal and medical issues we encountered, we had a hard time investing this process with the spiritual component we felt creating a life and a family deserved. We were amazed then when Elise Kinberg offered to lead a Mamuna fertility ritual for us in the synagogue. This is a Moroccan Jewish tradition that uses foods that are symbols of fertility. Elise gathered a dozen, as I recall, TBI women for this ritual, most of whom we didn't know, and fed us dates with butter and walnuts and parsley and buttermilk and blessed us. This ritual gave us an incredibly beautiful Jewish spiritual experience that gave us strength to deal with the other alienating experiences of being lesbians in exclusively heterosexual spaces. The next month, Mary was pregnant. We had been together for 10 years and wanted to ritualize our relationship before the baby was born. Remember, gay people couldn't get married legally or by most Jewish clergy. We planned our own, we called it a Brit Halev, a covenant of the heart, and we held it at Campbell Senior Center. We didn't ask Rabbi Kinberg to officiate or to have a wedding in the synagogue. We knew that he wouldn't, and really, in this respect, I think our expectations were too low. We just sort of accepted our relationship would not be consecrated in TBI, in the TBI community, or anywhere, as the straight marriages were. I think we didn't ask, so we wouldn't be refused. As much as makes me emotional. As much as I wanted to belong in the institutional space, I knew we didn't fully belong. We did have friends come from all over the country they made us a chuppah, they held it over us. Our friend Rebecca officiated. Lizzie Reese gave us a tallis we wore around both of our shoulders. We had a wonderful klezmer band, and 80 people danced all afternoon. We made a sweet, queer wedding outside the temple. Eli was born 6 months later. The register guard would not print both our names in a birth announcement. Because I hadn't given birth to Eli, I had to adopt him. In those days, it was a long and very expensive ordeal that included pre-placement and post-placement home studies by social workers, like before the child's there and after the child's there, a medical physical of me, many legal forms, an expensive lawyer, and letters from 5 people, preferably one from a clergy person. I asked Rabbi Kinberg to write a letter on my behalf to adopt my son. He wrote a beautiful letter and sealed the deal. Talmud Torah felt like a straight place in those days, and to me, Yiddishkeit seemed like a queerer, more progressive Jewish space. So when Eli was 3 or so, Lizzie Reese and I asked Ellen Rifkin to develop a Kinderschule curriculum for our kids with Yiddish songs, the accordion, socialism, queer Jewish culture. By then, Claire Kinberg, Rabbi Kinberg's sister, Tova Staben, and Ann Miller, and Bonnie Robbins had come to Eugene, and so a rich Jewish literary culture was here. Claire edited the wonderful National Jewish Lesbian journal Bridges, and books like Nice Jewish Girls and Twice Blessed were being published. Kinderschule was fun, but we knew that if we didn't enroll our kids in TBI's Talmud Torah, they wouldn't know other Jewish kids or be part of the community. So to TBI we went. Not so fun. Later, when Eli was in Talmud Torah's 6th grade class with 15 girls and him, and he was not enjoying it a bit, his frustrated teacher gave us a book called Make Your Own Bar or Bat Mitzvah, suggesting we do it on our own. While this might have been liberating to some families, to ours it was kind of shocking and very painful. We felt that we had done every damn thing on our own and really wanted to be part of the community. We didn't want to make it up, as we had our pregnancy, birth, wedding, adoption, and our jobs. We wanted to be part of the TBI B'nai Mitzvah families. I remember Rabbi Yitz understood this and asked to come to dinner at our house to tell Eli he was welcome and important. But Eli refused to go back to TBI and didn't have a bar mitzvah. I taught him his Torah portion at home, and which he chanted to me. Not much of a minyan, no inside celebration or affirmation. But it gets better. In the 90s, more lesbians joined TBI. Enid and Sally made the queerest Purim spiels ever. More lesbians took up leadership positions and pushed things even further to make TBI the queerest place in Eugene, which it remains. I want to end with my own recognition of how the changes to TBI enriched my life. Our queer friends who came from all over the country to our do-it-yourself Brit Halev in 1993 came to Eugene again 22 years later in 2015 for our daughter Sophie's bat mitzvah at TBI. Rabbi Ruchi called them all up to the bima and blessed them as our chosen family. Sophie wore the tallis we wore at our outside wedding for her inside bat mitzvah. That was the best day of my life, truly. To be inside the shul with my queer family, surrounded by my larger queer chosen family and the entire TBI community. And the next week, we were at another kid's bar bat mitzvah as supportive full members of the TBI community. Thanks.
Wow, that was beautiful, Julie. And I will just say that as one of the people that waited till things got better before we came here, I really appreciate the struggles you went through and how you helped make changes in this community. So in the mid-'80s, there was a group of Jewish lesbians that got together for a meeting. We were looking for some place that we could feel safe as lesbians and as Jews. And at that time, most of us weren't members of TBI. Although we yearned to stay connected to our Jewishness, many of us had rejected organized Jewish religion as being sexist, homophobic, and just not relevant to our lives. It wasn't a place that we felt safe. This group of women gathered monthly to celebrate Rosh Chodesh. We got together for Hanukkah parties and Seders. We called ourselves the Balabustas, not because any of us are fancied ourselves as outstanding homemakers, but because we were a bunch of bossy women. And when life's circumstances like the death of a parent, the birth of a child, a yearning for a spiritual center, drew many of us towards Temple Beth Israel, we discovered that this was not our parents' congregation. The liturgy had been degenderized. Women were sharing positions of importance as lay leaders, eventually as rabbis, as congregational presidents. Many of us found our place at TBI and the need for Balabusta seemed less necessary. TBI had become the place that we'd been searching for, a safe, inviting place where we could explore our Jewish identities, contribute to our community, work for social justice, and create a loving circle of friends. We found ourselves accepted, loved, and celebrated for who we are. Being straight in a non-straight world is kind of like being a Jew in Eugene. Mostly you feel safe and like you belong, and yes, you're aware there's some anti-Semitism out there, but mostly you feel like you belong. And sometimes, like when someone innocently wishes you Merry Christmas, you feel invisible. One day back in 2009, as a lesbian, I was feeling one of those invisible moments. And I began wondering what we could do to address this, so I put out a call to the LGBTQ community at TBI, and about 25 people showed up to our first organizing meeting. We all agreed that although we felt safe at TBI and loved, we felt invisible. Our queer identities were as important to us as our Jewish identities. We felt loved and embraced, but we didn't want that acceptance to make our struggles invisible, especially as we continued to fight to gain and now to keep basic rights in this country. So we became the TBI Queer Havurah with the mission to increase visibility to the TBI and Jewish community. To do this, we sponsored an oneg, threw a Purim party, had a falafel ball, co-sponsored a film, participated in providing dinners for families in need. We honored people in the TBI community with the Hineni Award, which is represented by a beautiful fused glass artwork by Helen Rosenau that's displayed in the TBI library. It has been a challenge to expand the Queer Havurah leadership beyond a bunch of mostly old lesbians. And I have to say that this is based on a talk that I gave a long time ago, and in that one I referred to as mostly middle-aged lesbians, but I had to change it to old. But what it means to be queer is constantly evolving, especially with a renewed backlash against gay people and especially trans people. It's even more critical that the Queer Havurah exists and has participation from everyone who identifies as LGBTQIA+, in order to include the diversity that is the queer Jewish community. It's my hope that as TBI moves into its 90+ years, that all of us old lesbians can move over and make room for new voices to continue to identify the needs and celebrate our Jewish queer community. And now I want to quickly talk about Sally and my wedding at TBI. It was an amazing time. Now, we participated in many weddings over the year. We did a demonstration with 2,000 other people in front of the IRS in Washington, D.C. We had our Canadian wedding, which was legal, but not recognized in the U.S. There was our Oregon Domestic Partnership registration. And finally, our Canadian marriage was recognized by the state of Oregon, and a year later, the U.S. Supreme Court decision. But the most meaningful wedding to us was 17 years before it became legal. The day we stood with Rabbi Yitz under the chuppah at TBI in front of friends, family, and our community, circling each other, receiving the 7 blessings, breaking the glass, and having what Sally always referred to as our big fat Jewish wedding.
So I'm last partly because I was hoping that I would get deeply inspired because I'm the other end of this train. My name is Jacob and I am a trans man. And I think everyone here is talking about a struggle that TBI went through and the success that came out of it and the community that came out of it. And I'm a beneficiary of that personally. My wife and I joined as a lesbian couple, and there was no comment or concern. We felt embraced immediately, and then 2 months later, I decided I was a guy, and the synagogue has walked right along with me through my entire transition as a new person here to the community. So if I'm a test case, you've all come through really, really well. So I think what I want to do more than anything is what I want to do whenever I talk about this, which is very few of you are going to have trans people in your family. Except for I was thinking that, you know, we're actually adding a whole new group. When you take the lesbians who are turning into men, we've got a whole new group for the Queer Havurah. But I think what I'm to do is to help you become better allies, because we really need you. We're a really, really tiny little group. And, you know, I'm the one who keeps speaking for all trans people at TBI. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. First, I'm really fond of the sound of my own voice, so you can always get me to say yes. But also because not only am I 67 and retired with a loving spouse who's worked her way through the fact that I have forced her into apparent heterosexuality against her will, that I'm also turning into a short white guy, which in a Jewish community just makes me a guy. And so it's safe for me, and I can talk for the people for whom it's not so safe. And so I think that's really what I'm here for, more to help you understand what it means now to be trans in a country where almost half the states have laws against at least children, and some of them against my own decisions about my medical care. And every state that's a chance on abortion is also, I mean, if you're going to interfere with one set of people's bodies, you don't have a big problem about interfering with another. So what I want to tell you today is, one day I was sitting in my house and my wife handed me a book, and when I stood up from reading the book, I felt as if I had realized that I had been in this deep, dark culvert all my life with, you know, standing water and in the dark and unable to move my arms, and I could suddenly realize that there was another world out there and I could have it. And I have that today. I feel like I came out of this culvert and there is this incredibly beautiful world, and it is in my body. And I don't know how to describe it beyond that. And every time I hear of trans people being forced back into that culvert, I understand trans suicide. When I spoke last spring, I spoke about a young woman named Leila Elkhorn who stepped in front of a train because her family would not accept her. And I had to look her name up because I wasn't clear. And so I put in trans women suicide train, and that was a really bad mistake because there were way too many of them. And I couldn't find her name, which was Leila Elkhorn. But this week, a young person named Nex Benedict was beaten in a bathroom in Oklahoma for being non-binary and high school. And she was 16, and she died the next day, either from the trauma or from committing suicide, most likely. You can't make people go back in that culvert, and we need you. We need you not to just tolerate us. Testosterone does wonderful things to bodies that were female at birth. It turns us really nicely male very quickly. If you allow a young person who is assigned male at birth to go through puberty and then to try to become female, you cannot undo what nature has done. And that is a terrible place. I speak regularly out at LCC's nursing class about healthcare for trans people, and one of the people there has a trans child who every night comes home just beaten. She's 18, and she's just beginning to face the microaggressions of her life every single day because she transitioned too late for her voice, and every single day, every single moment. So that's my message today, is what you did before, I need you to do everywhere. And I hope I'm under time, because I forgot to set my timer. All right. So, yeah, I'm going to save the rest because I want people, as long as you don't argue with me about my right to exist, I really love to answer questions about being trans, and I'm a safe person to ask. So, yeah, I'm done.
Can we have a more enthusiastic round of applause for these people? First of all, thank you. Thank you for showing up today to tell the story, and thank you for the ways you have shown up to create the places in this community for you to show up and for others to show up with you and after you. when we look at this timeline, and I really want to appreciate Jacob pointing this out, this timeline looks like a sort of linear progression, like we talk about at the Pesach Seder, mignut l'shevach, from shame to praise, from slavery to freedom, from a bad place to a better place. We know that history isn't linear. We know that there are improvements and backsliding and ups and downs, and that, as my mentor, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of the Queer Synagogue in New York says, we totally overestimate what can be done in 1 year, and we totally underestimate what can be done in 10 years, and that any victory is temporary and unless it is really safeguarded, and the work is never done. So I wanted to invite you, before we open it to questions, I wanted to invite the people on this panel to reflect on the work that still needs to be done. I mean, Jacob, you already did so very eloquently, but in case anyone else wants to do so here as well, or if there's anything you want to add, or even moments, in your recollection, if there's something you want to share that complicates the TBI story, where, it seemed like things were really getting better, and then there was a challenge, because we need those true stories to make sense of the moment we're in. When I think about, the moment we're in globally as well. So I just want to put that question out to any of you who would like to answer it.
I think we need to engage young people. And Enid's pointing out, we have the Queer Chavarah, it's a bunch of old, people. And so what is the challenge about that? Like, why? I know young people are busy, right? They're in school and they're working. But we have to figure out a way to make it really enticing. Because when I bring students, I teach at the University of Oregon in Women's and Gender Sexuality Studies, and when I bring students here, because they're Jewish students who, not all Jewish students, but they want to come here, and then they really like it. So trans students who are Jewish or not Jewish, and queer students, and then sometimes they come back, for this or that, but they're really busy. So we have to figure out a way to make it really feel like a home for them while they're in Eugene. And, we've tried different things I don't know, but I think we need to put some time into that. Otherwise, it's more, we need them to take over and make it irrelevant to where we are now.
I'm thinking of a line from a Bob Dylan song. If you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. And I feel like our congregation has been on a trajectory of being born with every step we've made with becoming a more inclusive community, a welcoming community, an accessible community. In so many different ways we've been being born. And welcome to my new friend. And the threats in this world are so great right now to freedom. And I hope that we'll join our spirits together to be strong, to be an antidote to the terrible forces that really are threatening our freedoms, and stay busy being born as a community. Welcome every step of the way. Russell, I heard you say when you first came in, where are all the gay guys?
I said I can't identify any other queer men in my community.
Right. Okay. All right.
Being both trans and otherwise queer. So this stuff really does work.
So we can still be being born. There's still more birth to be experienced, and may we merit that.
I'm going to tell you my fantastic mother story. So my brother, I have two brothers, and the elder one is 8.5 years older than I am, so I was about 4.5 at his bar mitzvah. Probably the first time I ever was in the adult grown-up sanctuary, or maybe even in the synagogue, I don't really know. So I'm sitting there next to my mother, and of course 4-year-olds always ask, why? So, what are those funny little hats? Explanation. Why are only the men wearing them? What are those things with the fringes? Explanation. Why are only the men wearing them? What's Grandpa doing? Oh, going up on the bima for an aliyah. What's Uncle so-and-so? Why only the men? Okay. This was in the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, the first original mother church of the Reconstructionist movement. And for years, the leadership had been trying to get the women, the congregation, to vote to include women fully, because they were thinking, you know, they have a bat mitzvah and then we never see them again. And a number of, and it had not yet passed over the years. They tried it several times. And my mother, from an Orthodox background, probably had an internalized proscription against, you know, women being inappropriately masculine in their ritual behavior, or something, that it wasn't quite decent. And so she had never felt comfortable with the idea and had not been one of the ones saying, yes, yes. But suddenly her 4-year-old daughter was saying, why? And she realized she could not say to me, you are going to be a second-class citizen, get used to it. And when she said that to the congregation, the vote switched, and the rest is history. And we have women rabbis. Yay! Thank you, Mother.
We can open now for questions and for additional recollections and historical corrections, if there is the desire for that. And yes, Maram is demonstrating for us how to come to the microphone.
Yes,
Thank you,
come
Maram.
to the mic. I'm one of those annoying academics. I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just going to talk. So I'll just preface it that way. And this is my love story to TBI. I arrived in 1994. And I just want to say thank you to the folks who are up there on the bima. I came to TBI never having been a member of a synagogue. My mom wasn't Jewish. We went to an Orthodox synagogue when I was a kid, and were told that the children really didn't belong there. But I always came to high holiday services, and I saw a lot of you up there. And even without it being said, I saw these women being appropriately masculine and indecent up on the bima during services, and I knew this would be a home for me. And then the next weekend, Sally and Enid were having a yard sale, and I just happened to stop by, and they immediately recruited me for Balabusta and also into TBI. And I just want to say thank you. It has changed my life for the better.
Wow, thank you for adding to our record of who we have been in TBI and our history. Rabbi Yitz started as a cantor here for many years, and we had a rabbi and a cantor, and then he became both and continued leading. One piece that I would like to add to acknowledge TBI's forward vision and putting action behind words is that when we had our first woman rabbi, she was a lesbian rabbi, married to a lesbian rabbi. And that took guts of TBI's part. And she was the leader during the beginnings of the the building campaign. And while Rabbi Yitz was on sabbatical, and she was so beloved that the board tried to extend her contract, and other things happened, and that's not this story. But we were willing to hire a lesbian rabbi, and that's, I think, very important to remember too. Add that into our institutional history.
Thank you. And your comment, Lisa, reminds me that one thing, this is completely my fault that I left off this timeline, is that when I went on sabbatical in 2022, 2 years ago, part of the coverage for that was a para-rabbinic intern, Matt Wilson, who was openly non-binary and did a lot of work with the queer chavurah and teaching Torah in this community, and who is now at RRC in rabbinical school. And so, Matt, if you watch this, sorry for forgetting to put you on the timeline. It's for posterity.
So I want to ask a question. Is it working? Okay. I mean, I was born and raised in Alabama. All of my relatives still live in Alabama from my family, which this week is not a thing that you say publicly. And we have a nephew who's trans. And I guess I want to ask very directly, what can people do? I understand the politics of representing and, you know, being active to promote trans rights, but I worry about what else is there. What does a trans community look for from those of us who are not actively daily involved in that to become an ally? Could you be specific about how to help me as an aunt who...
If I had a nephew in Alabama, I would ask him to move in with me.
He lives in California.
So sorry. Well, if he lives in California, buy him some men's cologne and, you know. Where in California?
LA.
Roughly. What?
LA. And he understands that he cannot really live in most places in the United States.
Are we using he and him appropriately?
Yes.
Okay. Does he have supportive parents?
Oh, yes.
And
a supportive family.
Then really, truly, buy him men's products. That I have told many a supporter of a teenage trans boys that, you know, it's what they want, and it's affirming, and that's what you're really providing as an aunt at this point. If his parents are there and he's got support, and then just to be an ally in your trans community, and if you don't know how else to do it, I can tell you, transponder can always use money. But you know, I spoke out at LCC and I got asked again this year about how to support trans kids, and it hit me afterwards I was wrong in my answer. The best way to support trans kids is to raise people who don't hurt trans kids. The chances of any of us having to raise a trans child are fairly small, but the chances of raising a child who is transphobic, either on purpose or accidentally, is pretty high. And so I would worry more about the family members. How can you be a support to help them as they come into awareness of it? How can you increase the safety for kids? You know, I walked into my grandchild's school, and because she's here in Eugene, and the entry was right at the heart of just some of the worst. When Next Benedict died this week, an Oklahoma state senator said, "We don't want that filth in our state." And I think of every trans kid in that state. I think what that must feel like to them. And then my grandchild's school in the opening has all these pictures of trans and non-binary and lesbian couples and gay couples and just this right at the doorway. And it was just what I needed. And sometimes it's that, you know, it's putting here, him or she and her or whatever your pronouns are in your Zoom. It's, you know, it's just dumb stuff that makes me feel safe, that makes me know that I'm going to be okay when I'm around you. Okay.
Staying on a similar topic, something that you said concerned me, and it's because I have a granddaughter living in Eugene who is trans, and she came out and let us know when she was 16. Now she's 17. She's only now starting to take hormones. I was disturbed when you said it goes well for boys, but not for girls. Yes. What can we do?
Teach people to be more tolerant, and also this horrible fear of puberty blockers, this amazing fear of this thing that a parent and a child and a doctor and a therapist all work together for all of a child's pre-adolescence, and then when adolescence is coming on, say, okay, let's just stop this. Let's just stop this process and give this child a few more years to make up their mind before their body starts to change irrevocably. For somebody who's adding testosterone to their body, my voice, I mean, I could go back, and I would never lose the deep voice. There are things I would never lose, but a trans woman is forever in a place where they are visible and uncomfortable to people, and they don't meet our societal standards of beauty for a woman, and we get hung up on what their genitalia is instead of who they are. And so, you know, that we can't undo what's done for people. We can only make it safer for kids to have those conversations and to learn and to grow. For your granddaughter, transponders here in Eugene is a lifesaver, both for trans people and for trans kids and parents of trans people. If you don't know about them, you should get to know them. Big cities don't have resources like trans people are here in Eugene. It's really amazing.
She is taking hormones now at 17, and you know, it sounds like from what you're saying it's too late, so why even do it? Does it help somewhat?
Why what?
Why take hormones at 17 if what I'm understanding you to say is it doesn't help?
Yes, it will help. It will change her body. It will give her breasts. It will give her a more feminine face. It will not undo whatever changes puberty has already done. A deeper voice, a voice box. There is a thing called dysphoria, and that's what living in that culvert is. This alienation and discomfort with your body. And the closer you can get to the body that conforms to the closer I can get to the body that conforms to how I feel about it, the less dysphoria I have. There are parts of my body that will not. I am the mother of 3 children. I gave birth to 3 children. There is no changing those parts of my body that carried a child. I can't undo them. And so they don't look quite male to me. I can live with that because there are trade-offs. But for someone who has grown to a male height, who has a male broad shoulders, who has a male body, estrogen can't undo the effects of testosterone.
And I do notice that her voice, she speaks very softly.
Yes.
Very softly, and she's very self-conscious about her voice.
And there are people who do voice training, and it's a really nice thing to pay for some of that for someone if you want to give them a gift.
Thank you. I didn't think of that.
There's people in town that actually do
Thank you.
Thank you for this panel. It's so wonderful. And I wanted to shift our attention, if I may. I feel like I know now something more about Eugene and our history. And I'm curious, for those of you who are more embedded in the larger Reconstructionist movement, could you say something about where Eugene is in its journey relative to other? I mean, is this a national, do we represent something that we can say is a national story now, or are we on a margin still of inclusion? I don't have a picture of the movement, and I'm curious if you could give more of that.
To some extent, yes. The first RRC graduating class was 51 years ago, 50 years ago, 50-ish years ago, and it had only one student, and he was a man. The second class had 5 students, and one was a woman. RRC did begin ordaining women from very near the inception of the movement having a rabbinical school. I am fuzzy on the timeline. My understanding is that already in the 80s, RRC officially did have a policy of ordaining gay and lesbian. I'm deliberately not saying LGBTQ because that wasn't the acronym then, but did have a policy of ordaining gay and lesbian students, but it wasn't very talked about, and there wasn't necessarily support for those students. So that, for example, is the milieu in which my mentor, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, came into the rabbinate, where there was a need to there was still certainly a need to advocate for oneself, and even though hypothetically RRC was ordaining gays and lesbians, that didn't mean it was actually safe to be out. In the 90s is when progress really was made, and I know there were several graduating classes in the 90s where students had a pact as an entire class that they would not talk about their families, and if asked, would just say whether or not they were partnered as a pact to support the LGBT students, really at that point probably still gay and lesbian students in their class, their classmates. At this point, officially in the movement, it is pretty much a non-issue. RRC has ordained openly everything. Trans, non-binary, who all have been placed, have jobs, are serving synagogues, are serving the Jewish world in other ways, except to the extent that, as we know, of course it is an issue, because it is an issue in the United States. So those rabbis, as supported as they may feel in the movement, there may be half of the states in this country where they wouldn't feel safe serving, no matter how warm and welcoming their microcosmic congregation is. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Both Enid and Julie have made the point that we need to have younger people involved in the queer Havurah and in the synagogue generally, not just LGBTQ, XYZ, and however more that is to come. And I would ask that those who support that kind of an effort, including Julie and Enid and anybody else in this room or in this community, get together, and I'll be right there in the front, and let's get something started to make that happen.
I want to thank all of you there were many times where your words moved me to tears, and I think when you think about revolutions, there's a lot of foundation that goes on, and thank you. You've all contributed to what TBI is today. And I want to speak as an ally, or what I want to be an ally, and I think there are many people here who want to do that. And I just think TBI is, not to pat ourselves on the back too strongly, but has really shown people the way, and I'm very grateful for that. Also, with regard to Transponder, it is a wonderful organization, and I just wanted to say that they have a day of visibility, I think, on March 31st, and I think it would be wonderful if we had a presence there. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, and also for everybody for being vulnerable. So I'm going to share some information and probably attach a plea to it. So I work for the Oregon Department of Human Services in the Child Welfare Program. For those who don't know me, I'm Phil Moses. Most of you know me, I think, and probably most of you know where I work. So a few years ago in the state, there was a policy change, which was probably a good policy change, but that's a different debate, that essentially does not allow us to place children out of state unless they're being adopted or they're moving in with family members or kin, so close friends. So what that means is when we cannot place a child who the state of Oregon has jurisdiction of, if we can't find what's commonly referred to as a foster home, we put these children in a hotel. And we keep looking for a place, a family, ideally, for them to live with. For the last 3 years, here in Lane County, we've had usually 2 to 3 children in what we call temporary lodging, meaning living in a hotel. For about the last 6 months, we've had at least 4 and as many as 7 children living in a hotel. The reasons why we can't, the reasons why these children are difficult to place are behavioral issues. So most of them, all of them actually did have at least one, and actually most of them had 3 or 4 placements in either homes or behavioral placements that can hopefully help them with the many issues that they have. Obviously, all of these children have been heavily traumatized. The reason why I kind of bring this up now in this setting, in the context of today, is that about half of these children are struggling with their identity. And very actively struggling to the point where sometimes one week we'll be informed as their caregivers to refer to them as a he, and the next week it could be a they. So I want you to be aware of this. Right now we have these children living with us in hotels, and they need homes. And they need caring, loving homes for people who are willing to do something that probably none of you have done before, and that's take care of a kid who's has been and continues to be heavily traumatized for a lot of different reasons, their identity being one of those reasons. And just to freak you out a little bit more, it costs all of us about $3,000 a day to take care of these kids. That's $1 million a year. And we've got at least 4. So until we can come up with a better system, this is what we're having to deal with. So I really wanted people to know that, because I think most of you probably aren't aware of this kind of situation. It's here in our county and in pretty much every county in Lane County. We're not Alabama, we're Oregon, and we have these kids who are struggling and have no place to go and live out of hotel rooms. And I wish I could say there's an easy answer. There's not an easy answer other than people stepping forward and willing to make a home for them. And I'm happy to talk about it with you later. But I also wanted to note that about half of these kids have ongoing struggles with their identity. And that's another kind of piece of this complexity that we've historically been dealing with and continue to deal with and will continue to deal with. Oh, and just to give you one other piece, their ages range from 11 to 19 years old. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Phil. So to change tack and follow on Judy's comment, I know there's a lot of concern in the room around how do we serve the needs of / encourage the leadership of young LGBTQ folk coming of age. And I'm looking around and I think there's maybe possibly 4 people in this room who are younger than I am, and maybe not that. But I did want to extend that invitation without putting any individual on the spot, but just since this has been a panel about TBI history, and the people here who are younger than I am maybe have not participated very much in TBI history, if any of them wanted to come to the microphone and talk about like their take as younger people on what would compel them about being involved or why they're not feeling compelled. And that's all.
Hey everyone, my name is Kyle. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. My name is Kyle. It's my first day at TBI, so I definitely did not expect to talk. But I think that, if I'm not wrong, my great aunt has been like at least going to virtual ceremonies for a while, or like different online events, and it's also really great. I was invited here by Professor Epstein and Professor Raiskins on the panel, and so that's all meaningful. What I do want to say is that, I grew up in a part Jewish family. My great aunt here, who lives in Springfield, is one of the people who is like the most practicing of Jewish culture and traditions in my family, and one of the reasons why I got more involved in Judaism when I came to Eugene and left my childhood household. But what has really like made a difference for me in terms of being part of spaces or not being part of spaces has been like that invite from other young people. I attended like Chabad meals and on Fridays for about a year and a half during my college experience here, and that was because of like having friends who also went and invited me. And so what I would encourage, I guess, in terms of like thoughts is that connect with like young Jewish student leaders in communities, whether that's in high schools, whether it's in the colleges here, Lane Community College, University of Oregon, and then have them bring their friends, and like that will, and then encourage those young people to come back and bring their friends. And like, because I do think that like the best invite, I mean, I'm here because I was invited by my professors, which is great, but I think most young people are most compelled when they're invited by another young person. And so I would encourage that as like a tactic, and maybe Shayna or other folks here would want to add.
All right, whoa. Hi everyone, my name is Shayna. I can share my own personal story. I think it's a success story of TBI for sure. I started going to school at the University of Oregon in the pandemic in 2020. I'm from California, and I was still kind of coming to terms with my own identity. And living in the dorms, I took Dr. Raiskin's class, and it was all about the Outliers and Outlaws Project and a digital archive that taught me all about this lesbian history around me. And it was fascinating because I didn't know a lot of people that were like older and openly queer. And as I was kind of coming to terms to my identity, it was really powerful to kind of see that representation. And we had to pick a project on a subject, and there were a lot of random words on a page, and I saw the word Balabusta, and I'm like, what does that mean? So I ended up looking that up, and I did my project on Enid. So Enid is a celebrity. And I was very, very inspired by the Freedom Seder that the Balabustas did. I don't know what year that was, if anyone.
92 or 3.
That really was powerful to me as an example of, you know, like interfaith collaboration and just the power of community. And so I worked as a Hillel student leader on campus, and last year I was able to put on my own Freedom Seder on campus. That was inspired by Hugo. So I'm very thankful for this community, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for young people to get more involved. Yeah.
Are there any last aspirations that our panelists would like to share?
Obviously, the struggle continues. La lutte continue, as the French said in Paris during the university uprising. So let's be sure that we keep it in the front of mind and not let it become something we've already dealt with, because life moves and we have to move with it. So who knows what next constituency we're going to welcome with open arms, because why not? It's part of the human race and part of the Jewish community. So great to see you all here today.
So I want to share a couple of observations about what I think some growing edges in this area might be as we think about people who have multiple intersectional identities that they don't want to have to check at the door. I think one thing that TBI and many Jewish communities is going to need to reckon with is the multiplicity of sources of Jewish identity that people are coming to our community with, and the who is a Jew, who gets to decide who is a Jew, and based on that decision, how does one join the Jewish people? I think that is getting ever more complicated, and it relates to this question we've been talking about, because we've been talking about identity and who belongs here. And on the other side of that spectrum, if it's a spectrum. We heard today about sort of the pride in egalitarianism that TBI has held over many, many years. There are Orthodox gay and lesbian and trans Jews who also do not want to check either their Jewish commitments or their queer identities at the door, who don't want to be vilified for their commitments to their Jewish practice any more than they want to be vilified for their sexual or gender identities. And not that I'm suggesting that TBI be an Orthodox synagogue, but in as much as we do aspire to be an ever more inclusive center for Jewish life, the ways that we tell, again, the stories of who is a Jew and who belongs here and how people belong here are, I suggest, an additional growing edge for our community that may make some of us uncomfortable, but are the growing edge questions that I see us having to confront in the next years and decades. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming today. I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to register to come this Thursday evening to a concert that was initially titled Kol Isha, which it's by the ensemble klezmer band Lebedek, featuring an evening of traditional, or not necessarily traditional, Yiddish songs composed by, made famous by, and about women. But we were advertising it as such, and we were not getting very many people signing up to come. And I was worrying that maybe people thought it was some kind of Orthodox thing, but it's not. It's a spoof on the Orthodox concept of a woman's voice. So it is for everyone. We encourage you to come. There's tickets for sale online this Thursday evening, I believe at 7 p.m. And Gary, remind me again when our next date is for our next TBI at 90 program? Oh, it's on the back. Thank you. March 10th, April 14th. And it would really be remiss to close without thanking John Hirsch for running the streaming. Thanking our wonderful TBI at 90 task force, Gary Tepfer, Emily Heilbrunn, who put together today's panel, and Ellen Tadris, who have been doing so much of the visioning of how we are celebrating this year and whose voices we're hearing from. I want to thank Shauna Husbands-Henkin for her work along with the Arts and Aesthetics Committee and creating the exhibit out in the hallway of TBI at 90. I hope you'll all take a look at it. And again, thanks to our panelists for sharing of yourselves and your histories today.